back to the museum, and he said, we got a lot of stuff on the Indians. He said this was actually like the government main community for a tribe of Indians that don't exist anymore. That tribe was called the Timucas. He said the Jeckyll Island Club was actually built on top of everything that the Indians had. So they just kind of wiped the village out and built the club on top of it. So wherever the chief's house was, there was a cottage now. Wherever the council house was, there was now the Jeckyll Island Hotel. You know? And he said everything that's built and visible today is actually sitting right on top of something that was significant in the Indian village when it existed. You know? And so I said, well, let's look at the museum. I want to see some of the Indian stuff. So we're looking at arrowheads and spear tips. And he said, do you want to see the bones? And I said, well, yeah. That sounds, don't get to see a skeleton very often. I said, are they where we can actually see them, or are they buried? He said, no, they're visible. So they had a burial site that they had been very respectful for when they built the museum. When they found a burial site, they didn't move the bones. They left them where they were. And so I'm looking at 4 skeletons of the Timucua chiefs. And I realized, man, these guys are really tall. And I commented to the guy that, how tall are these guys? They look unusually large. And he said, yeah, they're all about 8 or 8.5 foot tall. He said all the Timucas were unusually tall, even the women. And he said, oh, by the way, I've got a painting that actually shows the Indians. I said, well, I'd like to see that painting then. So he pulls that out. I'm looking at it, and it shows the Indians and all their regalia, and they're dancing around and having some kind of a ceremony. And then I see an altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting. And so when you look at the details, 2 of the shamans or chiefs are holding a baby up by the ankles, and they're whacking their heads off and spilling the blood on this altar. Mm. And I'm like, sir, I don't want to be disrespectful of your training and archaeological understanding and history, but I don't know of any native tribe that did what I'm seeing here, unless it was an act of war. And this is really, really unusual. And I've seen this type of scene with artifacts over in the Middle East. And I've seen weapons like this over in the Middle East. Well, he was quite interested in that because he loves Native American history, but he's starting to question, maybe I need to dig into this more. That was his comment. So I said, at that point, then I thought, I believe this is why I'm here. I needed to see this and hear about this. At this point, I'm not that concerned about the financial stuff anymore. I'm wanting to know, where is this altar? And so I asked him, I said, can you take me to this altar? He said, I can take you to the altar, but you can't see it. And I said, why can't I see it? Is it buried? He said, no, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar? He said, well, Rockefeller was. So nice. We go over there, and he's got the keys, though. So we go into the house, and he takes me into the parlor. He said, you're standing right on top of the altar right now. This is the room that is built on top of it.
Now, this parlor, that's where those guys, J.P. Morgan and all those guys, actually conceived of the Federal Reserve, right? Right over that altar.
That's exactly right. It's the room that they were sitting in when they drew up the entire legislation and plan to pass it that became the Federal Reserve Act.
Wow.
So this was the conception of the Federal Reserve banking system on the parlor sitting on top of a blood sacrifice altar.